Today I'm going to be rendering this isometric final drawing. So I've got a selection of colours, coloured pencils I'm going to be doing it in, just as that's what you mainly have access to at school. I could do a separate one in Copic markers, but I think that it's safer in this early stage. We do pencils, and next year we can look at the markers. Alright, so this was my reference. I'm doing this design. I've made a few modifications and changes, but that's generally, I'm going to be rendering a timber texture with obviously a bit of shadow. This one doesn't have a very clear shadow. I think this side's a little darker. This is like a 3, 2, 1. You know how if you go, if the different degrees of shade. Doesn't really have a specific shadow. I might do a little bit of shadow off to the side just to give the impression that it's sitting on a surface. Alright, now let's get the timber finish happening. So I'm going to select a few colours. It looks like some of these might need sharpening. So I'm going to go with like a mustardy brown. I've got a few of those. You might not have as many. I'll probably use something like a darker brown, just for the darker shades, just lightly, and I might use this lighter golden type brown for like the top area. I might even, if you wanted to introduce like a yellow in the top area or something, a skin color type of thing, so you've got a very clear distinction between the light areas through to the dark areas. Okay, so a few of these need sharpening, so I'll do that. Alright, now they're sharpened. Okay, so I'm going to start with my lightest areas first, and then I'll work down to the darkest. Or you can work from the darkest to the lightest. Either way is fine. Actually, you know what, I've changed my mind. I'm going to go dark and then the light. So I'm going to go the darkest side first. So I'm going to start with one of the darker colours first, and I'm going to very lightly shade the whole face. The first thing I want to put in is just the impression of a bit of colour and shadow. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the areas that are timber. I'm not going to put in any texture as yet. That's one of the finishing touches. With the texture for timber, I'm going to use the method whereby you show a bit of grain, which is like using some of the medium colors to put lines through it, maybe little knots. It might be a little bit over-emphasized, but it does need to convey the impression of timber, even though it doesn't make it super clear in this that you have any kind of grain showing through, because of course the ply has a very fine grain. So this might seem too dark, but really what I'm trying to do is create like a bit of a blend of two dark tones to give that impression that it's in shadow. So this is a very light sort of application of the dark, and I could probably in here add this as like a slightly darker in here, because these are those edges whereby that's the end grain, that's where the laser cutter actually cuts. I'm going to do two-tone color across this whole dark face, because and this is slightly darker because that's end grain, and of course all these are end grain, so give them a little bit of extra end grain. And this is face grain. The lighter tone is the face grain. Okay, so that's that with the darkest colour. Now the second darkest, this has kind of got more yellow in it. Actually, I probably will go like the very mustardy kind of brown now. And I'm going to go over the whole thing again to give like a feel that it's not a dark walnut kind of timber, but it is a lighter pine timber, but it's actually just in shadow. because this is the darkest face, and by using two colours it actually gives it sort of more depth, makes it feel a little bit. Oh, I think I need a extra line there to show the thickness of that. I was bound to miss a few things. In fact, I had to add those after the last video because I realised that I missed that bottom face there. These are the open cut areas. I'm gonna do those last, after I've done the actual timber itself. Rendering is a really important thing to convey the material. It really does help communicate your design intention, the look, the feel, the aesthetics, the materials. Therefore, that would inform the method of construction. If it's timber, obviously it's, you know, possible to laser cut it. If this was metal, we wouldn't be laser cutting this unless we've got the access to some industrial equipment. Okay, so I'm even going to go over those dark areas with a little bit of the sort of heavy-handed sort of very firm application of this like yellow mustard, because I don't just want to show shadow with one colour, I'm going to show it with two. If I used a grey tone underneath that, it would be a different look, you know. So yep, that's, just get that bit. That's that face sort of done, except for the texture. Now I'm going to go across to the next face, and I'm going to go slightly lighter. So this is going to be the darkest tone I use on my next face. It was the lightest tone of this face, and it's going to be the darkest tone for my next face. So layering over this with one full application of this colour. Trying to keep it smooth and not show all of the pencil lines. So I don't, you know, end up with like a scratchy, scribbly kind of look. You know, that's not my intention. Otherwise, that would end up looking like I'm trying to convey some sort of texture unintentionally. So I'm going to keep it smooth initially, and then I'll add my texture more deliberately, which will be the timber texture. And it will have a directional grain as timber does. Okay. Okay, that's applied pretty much. Now, again, I'm going to use this color to add the dark tones, the shadow, the end grain I should say, the end grain for this face, which is going to be all of those bits where the end grain is peeking around. You can already see that this is slightly different to the other face. If I wanted to make that darker again to sort of increase that emphasis, I could come back and sort of start to add in a little bit more dark and depth, just to, you know, improve the three-dimensionality of that shape and the shadow. Okay, so I can judge as I go, and I can go back to faces. If it's too light, I can make it too dark, but if it's too dark initially, that's going to be pretty hard to go backwards. So I tend to go a bit lighter the first time around. Okay, on my end grain, up the side. Okay, I think that's it. Alright, now I could use another tone here, but I risk making it like too dark. And I think I want to just sort of like keep the emphasis that this is more shadow than this face. I'm just going to make this darker rather than have to make this lighter. Okay, just to give a sense of being 3D. Okay, dark face, medium face, and then we've got the light face. So I'm going to start with my light tone across the whole face. So this is the lightest one. This is like a skin color really. Across the whole face to give that like hint of a timber tone. Now the edges we're going to have to match with these faces. So it's not like the whole top lid will be a light tone. The edges will actually take on the characteristics of the face that they're, you know, oriented to. Okay, so I've got a nice light tone. It's very subtle and light there. I might go slightly darker, so I might be coming back to the one I used on this side and just putting a really light-handed approach. Adding it though to sort of give a clearer impression of that timber colour. Now it does tend to occasionally like go a little bit uneven, so I'm just going to go in the direction of the green that I intend to put on there. Looks like there's some areas that are coming through a little bit darker than others for whatever reason. Okay, it's probably due to some of the lines I've erased and things like that. Okay, so this is going to be slightly darker, the end grain here, end grain here. Now when it comes to this one's going to be actually the tone of this face grain. Probably a little bit darker because it is end grain. End grain does tend to be, and it's also laser cut. So that's going to be that one, and this is going to be more this one. Okay, so probably going to go over this, make it even darker. Alright, so I've given my shades, my tones. Now I'm going to do the grain, the texture. Okay, I could probably stand to smooth this out a little bit more, and keeping a sharp pencil does help in making our face rendering smooth. You know, there's like a little bit of patchiness, and you really need to take it into the corners and the edges and not miss bits. Okay, so yeah, make a nice even tone. Alright, now it's gone a little bit blunt, so I'm going to sharpen that up so I can do some really nice grain. I'm actually going to use this on these two faces, and I'll probably use this one on the darkest face. So I need both of these to be sharp. Okay, boom, sharp. Alright, now I'm going to do a little bit of grain, so it's going to be a line, sort of snaps a little bit. And I find that doing kind of a knot is also a nice effective way of conveying grain. I'm not going to worry too much about going over those dark faces. Of course, this is not the reality of what our timber looks like, but to give that impression of timber, you need to put in a fairly clear, this paper is actually not the best paper, and these are very, very old watercolor pencils. Okay, so I've got kind of the idea of grain coming across there. Be nicer if that was like a little bit more even. I think that these pencils have probably had their day. Now the next one, I'm going to do some vertical grain, so I'm probably going to give the impression of some lines coming down. I could just go over that and see if I can use a different pencil, because that last one wasn't so great. smooth those lines out, make them a little bit more consistent because they're a bit patchy. Unintentionally. Yep. It's a bit better. Yep. Okay. Slightly better. This one's a bit weird. Okay. Now finishing off this face. Putting in those knots occasionally wherever, you know, I see fit, where it's obvious enough that it's a knot. Okay, so a little bit of grain there to make it timber. Now this one is going to, I'm going to use the darkest pencil for this one, because otherwise you won't see it. So I'm just putting a little bit of grain. Coming to the conclusion, except I haven't put in the areas where the light comes out. You can, I think it would be nice to sort of like switch colors. So I'm going to go for maybe like a super light yellow, something like that. So I can find one that's actually, you know, still got, it doesn't need sharpening, just to save a bit of time. So I'm going to just put a little bit of glowy yellow coming through there to create a bit of a contrast. So a little bit of an impression that there's a bit of a glow. And now I'm going to stick to the edges as the darker parts of that glow, and then the center becomes the lightest part as it comes away from the edges of the timber. Okay. Alright, so we've got a bit of a glow effect coming through. A little yellow glow. Hopefully possible to see. Then I'm going to put a bit of shadow on it. So I could use pencil for this. I'm happy to just go with the pencil I used originally. Now, if you look at the original, there's just a little bit of shadow. And if you think about it, really, if you've got a dark face, that's the direction of the shadow. So the shadow will come off here a bit. So we'll have just a very subtle kind of fall off from the legs where it's closest to the surface, that there's a bit of a shadow coming in that direction. Okay, and I can smooth that out a little bit. It's easy to smudge that. Okay, so very subtle bit of shadow. And we have our final rendered isometric. Now on this I could label, you know, I could label items like finger, join. I haven't done the cable, so it's going to be white, so I'll just give it a bit of shading to give it the impression that it's round. So shading goes on the underside. Okay, cable, and yep, we'll just put 3mm timber ply. Okay, that is pretty much it. That's finished. Thank you very much.